Great. Okay, cool.
Building a better Bay Area. Moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC 7 News.
Hi there, I'm Kristen Z. You're watching Getting Answers live on ABC 7. We're asking experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. Today, we have a Stanford infectious diseases specialist who shares why he thinks masks should not necessarily come off at all schools just yet. This in response to yesterday's state announcement that masking in schools will no longer be mandated after March 11th. Also, a nonprofit worker whose mission is to keep San Francisco's Tenderloin safe was shot last week. Our media partner, the San Francisco Standard, raises new questions about the city's security practices. But first, President Biden is giving his first State of the Union address tonight at 6 p.m. You can watch it here on ABC 7 Live. His address to the nation comes as his approval ratings are bogged down by the many international and domestic crises facing Americans. Joining us now to preview the State of the Union and discuss the war in Ukraine, East Bay Congressman Eric Swalwell. Congressman Swalwell, thanks for making the time for us.
Of course. Thanks for having me back.
Let's start by how concerned you might be by today's developments. We're hearing about the 40-mile-long Russian armored vehicle convoy headed to Kyiv. There's more bombing in cities. A TV tower was hit, civilian buildings. Seems like a shift in Putin's strategy, doesn't it?
He's becoming more and more brutal, forceful, with less regard for innocent lives. And we're seeing children have perished. Innocent children are now victims of Putin's war. And that's why it's so important that President Biden rallies the country tonight on what we can do as Americans and what we can do as global leaders to make sure that Putin fails. Of course, we can't ignore what's going on at home with the rising cost of gas, groceries, and there's a plan for that, and I look forward to hearing that. But we know in history, when dictators like Putin invade free people who have their own currency, their own language, their own culture, that they tend not to stop there, and this eventually makes its way to our doorstep. So we have to do all we can through sanctions and arming the Ukrainians to stand with them and see Putin utterly fail.
You alluded to the fact that some of these economic sanctions may cause some pain here at home for Americans, gas prices just being one of those. What other sanctions or actions outside of that can we still take? Levers that perhaps we or the international community haven't pulled yet but could?
Well, on the battlefield, there's nothing we could do that's more effective than arming the Ukrainians and working with our allies to do that. Share intelligence, they know put the X, so to speak, as they hit and push back who are taking innocent lives. But yes, isolating Russia by blocking their money, their travel, and their gas is critically important. And so we can continue to put pressure on them, but also the private sector. If you're a private sector CEO, and we have so many influential ones whose reach goes around the globe in the Bay Area, please consider what you are doing to enable Russia and what you could do to actually further isolate them. Because Hollywood stepping up yesterday and preventing the release of films into Russia, that actually has an effect because their elites, their oligarchs, that hits them the hardest. And so those are the types of steps that are immeasurable but could make a real difference.
All right. You told CNN that kicking every Russian student out of the U.S. should be considered. Of course, not all students are the children of oligarchs. Some of them might be, but not all. Do you still stand by that comment?
Yeah, I want the children of oligarchs and elites tied to Putin to have their visas revoked. Not every Russian student. And if I wasn't clear about that, I have been clear in the last couple of days as I've laid out the menu of options. But also, further disconnecting Russia through closing our embassies across the world that Russia has in different countries, limiting their presence at the UN, kicking them out of the different international organizations that they enjoy a benefit of being a member in, like the UN Commission on Human Rights. They have no business being in the UN Commission on Human Rights when they're killing innocent children in Kiev. And so those are the types of steps that I think could, again, put a cost on their actions and really make sure that Putin fails.
Speaking of membership in world bodies, of course, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is urging the European Union to give his country, immediate membership into that bloc. And of course, Ukraine would like to be part of NATO. How would you like to see those world bodies respond to that?
As the United States has, which is to equip Ukraine as much as we can militarily and to, in a coordinated way, put sanctions on Russia that takes them out of the international banking system and really make sure that Russians, who I think would rightfully be outraged, express that in the streets, in their protests, in any direct communication to Vladimir Putin, again, with the goal being that he fails.
I hear your emphasis about keeping Russia out, but what about bringing Ukraine in? Specifically, Ukrainian President Zelensky's urging of saying, if you're really with us, allow us into the EU now, or NATO. What do you think about that?
Well, that's certainly a decision for EU countries, and we're not a part of that. As it relates to NATO, we have put forward different criteria that Ukraine would have to meet, to go into NATO, because once they're in, because they're under attack under Article 5 of NATO, we would have to defend them. And President Biden has been pretty clear that we are not at this point putting troops on the ground in Ukraine, because that's World War III with Russia. And so I think the most effective thing we can do right now is to ensure Russia fails in the way that we arm collectively with global leaders, the Ukrainians.
All right, several recent polls show Americans disapprove of President Biden's handling of the U.S. relationship with Russia. And a new CNN poll shows more Americans say they do not trust the president to do the right thing in Ukraine. For those who give Mr. Biden low grades on his foreign policy here, is it fair or unfair?
Unfair. And I've seen polls where they approve of the sanctions that we've imposed on Russia. They approve of working to arm the Ukrainians. They don't want overwhelmingly do not want boots on the ground. So they approve of everything that Biden is doing, but they disapprove of Biden, which I think shows that our country is sharply divided over politics, but not on the policies that are needed. And so I think the president should stick to the person that he was when he ran for president, which is to unite the country. He may not get all of us, but I think for these times and what we need, he will unite enough of us.
All right, some of what's driving the disapproval, I guess, is President Biden's inability so far to deliver on key campaign promises. I realize it's only been a year, and I realize he faces strong Republican opposition on almost everything, whether it's voting rights, climate initiatives, or child care tax credits, and even some internal opposition within the Democratic Party. Do you expect to hear anything tonight that will put key items back on the front burner, back on track, or somehow change the narrative there?
We have to, because so many of those key items address the rising cost of gas and groceries. And as a father of 3 kids in diapers who does the grocery shopping in our house, I'm seeing that every weekend. It is astronomically going up, and that's because of supply chain issues. And also, I think, a little bit of greed on the corporate side that needs to be called out more as to why corporations are realizing record profits while Americans are paying record prices at the pump. And so the president will address that tonight, and a lot of that is going to be passing pieces that were in the Build Back Better plan so that we reduce the cost of gas, groceries, and other items.
So do you think that entails Build Back Better being broken up into smaller chunks and getting through Congress separately? Is that what we'll hear tonight? If you know anything about that, we'd love a preview.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that too. And the excerpts that I've read so far seem that he does have a plan on how to lower costs and increase wages. I haven't seen the specifics yet. That's why he'll give the speech tonight. Personally, as someone who pays a lot of money for childcare and recognizes that's the real for so many of our Bay Area neighbors, that a child care tax credit would help so many families across America, and the child tax credit, making it permanent, where you get that monthly distribution, of up to $300 per child. That goes a long way.
All right, finally, the midterms are coming up. What do you think the Democratic messaging needs to be?
Comeback America, that we are undergoing a record comeback where Joe Biden created 7 million jobs in the first year. We're at record unemployment. We are seeing COVID in the rearview mirror. American leadership is keeping us out of wars and stitching together alliances to stop dictators, but recognizing that inflation is a real problem, crime is a real problem, and that if we unite the country, that we can increase supply chains, make it in America, reduce the cost of gas, groceries, and healthcare, and make sure that we truly achieve this comeback story, because it is a comeback story considering where we were before President Biden was elected.
All right, Congressman Eric Swalwell, thank you so much for joining us today ahead of the
pleasure.
President's State of the Union. Take care.
Thank you.
Coming up next, we'll talk to a Stanford University infectious diseases specialist about the state's decision to end the school mask mandate. We'll be right back. All right, thanks for joining us today. While we wait for our next guest, our director has summed up this beautiful picture of the San Francisco Embarcadero for you. A little cloudy out there. Welcome back. In about 2 weeks, California is dropping indoor mask requirements in schools, but it's still up to the counties or local school districts to decide whether or not they want to align with the state. Some school districts have already announced they will not enact their own mask mandates, but others are still trying to decide how to proceed. Joining us live to provide some insight is Stanford infectious disease specialist Dr. Abraar Karan. Dr. Karan, thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
So starting March 14th, because that's the first school day after the state mandate is lifted on the 11th, masking in schools becomes optional unless your local county or school sets its own rule. First, do you support this decision by the state and the timing of it?
You know, for me, it's really about the data. what's the incidence of new cases, how fast are cases starting to uptick again when we pull back on masks. We'll see some of that happen now that we are pulling back, even over the next few weeks, although, the timeline will be a little bit longer before we can really make sense of trends. I will say this, the test positivity has come down pretty substantially. We're at 2.8% now. We were at 8% a couple of weeks ago. And when we're below 2%, closer to 1%, I think the chance of having a big sustained outbreak after that, especially with a lot of spread of Omicron, is hopefully going to be lower, but it's really hard to predict it. So I think if the data is continuing to head in the right direction, I'm hoping that the risk of, removing masks will be low, but it'll be hard to predict this with certainty.
Well, the fact that you didn't answer yes or no on the timing, but said you're looking at the data, but you cited some data. So does that data make you comfortable? Or are you suggesting that you're not totally comfortable yet, but perhaps in 2 weeks when the time comes, you will be?
Yeah, I think I will be comfortable when the time comes in 2 weeks. I mean, as I said, 8% a few weeks ago, 2.8% now. I expect in a couple of weeks that it'll be even closer to 1%. And for me, that's a low enough number where I think that the risk of big sustained outbreaks is low.
I see.
With that said, you have to pay attention to the local factors, local epidemiology, and it's not going to be the same everywhere. Every county won't be the same. And so, that's why county health departments kind of go off the data they have for their area, why some places are more hesitant than other places. But yeah, I think things are headed in the right direction. Absolutely.
So you think it may make sense for some counties, Board of Education, or some districts to still enact their own mask mandate in places perhaps where the numbers are not as good. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if the numbers in your area are not as good and your test positivity is high, or you're starting to see an uptick in cases, then I think you have to go based off the local data. And, what we do know is that in counties that kept mask mandates in place in the past, they had lower incidence of cases compared to those that did not. CDC has published this data. And so we know that there is data supporting, when you have masks in place, when you have a lot of spread, there's lower rates of transmission within schools. I mean, the challenge with schools is that kids are packed together in classrooms. The ventilation standards are going to be different in different schools, but there's a lot of work to be done there. And they're there for the whole day for many, many hours. So these are the conditions that kind of set you up for transmission. And this is why many of us have been hesitant to pull back on masks in this specific instance. And also, the vaccination rates are very low, relatively speaking, amongst kids. There's a lot of work to still be done there as well.
Right. Under 30% for kids 5 to 11. That certainly is not as high as you doctors would like. But give our families some advice who may be watching when they consider, now that it's strongly recommended to wear masks in school as opposed to required, maybe give us an example. Let's say you have a high school that's 95% vaccinated with good ventilation, kind of a new building and good testing. Would you say, okay, in that case, perhaps the marginal benefit of wearing a mask is not there, and maybe it's better to not wear a mask for the, whether it's the social or the clarity or whatever, they feel like they get out of that?
Yeah, I mean, so I would just first ask, do you have any people at home that are immunocompromised? Is your child immunocompromised? Are they at potential? Is anyone in your close circle at potential high risk? And what about their friends and other people in their classroom that may be as well? Because I think in these situations, it gets so tricky, right? Like if all kids are taking masks off, there could be a lot of social pressure, even for our most vulnerable kids to do the same. Some of those kids may not be vaccinated. And you may have a lot of this in certain neighborhoods and certain areas where there's lower levels of vaccination, where there, maybe lower income communities, schools that don't have those kind of protections like ventilation and whatnot. But I think if you come to the terms that all of those factors you think have been met, cases are very low, they've been low, then yeah, I think the chance is definitely much lower. And everything we do is a risk benefit. Every decision we make has a cost and it has a benefit. In terms of what the costs are of kids wearing masks for a little bit longer, I don't think anybody would argue that there's a big cost of having kids mask up for a few more weeks as cases come down further. In terms of what the longer term effects are of kids wearing masks, or what the longer term effects are of kids getting COVID, both of those are they're still up for debate. There's some people that argue that the costs are much higher in one camp versus the other camp. As you can see, there's not consensus even amongst health experts.
All right. Well, look, as you know, San Francisco Unified has not quite decided, with regard to whether to have a mask mandate in a couple of weeks, saying they're still working with their public health department and their teachers union. Do you think teachers' concerns should be factored into this equation?
Absolutely. I mean, teachers are frontline workers. Teachers are part of our community. They're a critical part of our community. Many teachers, maybe older, have certain conditions as well. Of course, they can get N95 masks, but the supply has not been where it needs to be. The variability of what masks are available, when they're available, how regularly you can get them, I imagine is going to differ across school districts as well. So absolutely, I think the concerns of teachers should be taken into account in these decisions. And I think we're all headed in the same direction right now with the way that the incidence is going, which means there's just much lower community incidence. We may be catching a relative break right now over the next few weeks or months. How long that lasts, I don't know. But yes, we work in communities. We have to take everybody's input in here when we make these decisions.
All right. And why do you suppose the state also made it optional as of today for the unvaccinated to wear masks in public? Some people say that seems to be a disincentive to vaccinating.
Yeah, very well, maybe. And, beyond that, you may have people that are vaccinated that keep masking because they're taking all precautions. And you may have the opposite, where people that have not been vaccinated yet may think COVID is not a big deal. As physicians, we've obviously taken care of patients with all sorts of viewpoints. And I have had a number of patients who got very sick with COVID, but still didn't want to get vaccinated, didn't feel like they needed to, didn't think it was a big deal. We can't let everybody's going to have an opinion, but we have to go based off the science, based off expert consensus when we make public health decisions for societies. And so I do think that there will be some people that can't wait to get their mask off, or not going to get vaccinated. And unfortunately, we may end up seeing them in the hospital at some point. I mean, we have for the past 2 years. We have a lot of work to do still.
Well, you've given us some factors to think about as we make our own decisions. Dr. Abraar Karan, thank you so much for your insight and time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Coming up next, San Francisco Standard, our media partner, is joining us to talk about its investigation into the security practices of the nonprofit group Urban Alchemy. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us and sticking with us. Here's another live look across the bay. Gorgeous shot looking at Sutro Tower from the East Bay. We'll be right back. Welcome back. ABC7 is excited about our partnership with the San Francisco Standard. Part of building a better Bay Area is highlighting those who are working toward the same mission we have here at ABC7. The Standard's deep and insightful reporting does just that. Today, we're talking to the Standard about the nonprofit organization Urban Alchemy and questions over the safety of its workers after one of them was shot on the job. The workers, or ambassadors, patrol the streets of the Tenderloin. Joining us live with more on this topic is senior reporter with the Standard, Josh Koehn. Hi, Josh. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Kristen. Thank you for having me.
All right. So this latest violent incident in the Tenderloin happened last week, right? The Urban Alchemy ambassador was hit in the shoulder, we understand, in broad daylight. What's happened to him? Do you have any updates?
You know, there haven't been a lot of updates on his status. He was taken with a gunshot wound to the hospital. He was in stable condition. When we spoke with an Urban Alchemy director who asked not to be named, they told us that this worker was trying to move drug dealers off the street as part of some security work that they've been doing.
So that's the kind of thing that you imagine in the past police might have done. But of course, the city's been trying to move away from those police engagements with people. And tell us about how Urban Alchemy came into the picture in the city.
Yeah, absolutely. So Urban Alchemy is a nonprofit, and they've been brought on to do a range of different services in the Tenderloin. And businesses and residents have actually said that they're doing great work. If you go down to the Tenderloin by day, things are so much better than they used to be in recent years. But when you go back at night and the workers have gone home, the Tenderloin's kind of returning to its old form. And so what happens is Urban Alchemy is doing a range of good services, but they're also doing security work. And that has raised a lot of questions about whether or not the nonprofit is putting them in a good position and maybe risking their safety.
So let's talk about that, right? Because if you're doing security work, presumably you have to have standardized training. So in the case of this person and these ambassadors, what kind of training do they get?
Well, that's a great question, and something that actually we're still trying to answer. When we went through state records, we couldn't find any licenses or registration for Urban Alchemy or its employees. There is a requirement for a really thorough training to be a security guard in California, as well as even San Francisco. However, there is a bit of a loophole that seems to be getting exploited here. If you have a nonprofit, your employees aren't necessarily held to the same standard. One thing I should add, though, is that we spoke with the Department of Consumer Affairs, and they told us just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean your employees can all of a sudden just run around doing security work.
I see. All right. Well, more needs to come out with regard to its nonprofit status and how it affects the requirements here. But I do wonder, did this get so much attention because this person was an ambassador with Urban Alchemy, or is it that it comes after another high-profile case, a teenage girl who had overdosed in the Tenderloin and died? Is it just the cumulative effect?
You know, I think there's always going to be a cumulative effect in the Tenderloin, whether it's the epidemic of overdoses or street crime. But this particular incident with the ambassador being shot and the work that Urban Alchemy is doing and the substantial amount of city money that they're getting, this warrants a closer inspection.
Speaking of closer inspection, I think I heard they just got a $19 million contract, based on your reporting, to run a homeless shelter in Lower Nob Hill. What's happened to that?
You know, the homeless shelter in Lower Nob Hill, residents and businesses around there, as we've seen traditionally in San Francisco, anytime you put a shelter in a neighborhood, there's going to be a lot of pushback. And that story is still very much developing on how to navigate that, because obviously we know these services are deeply needed in San Francisco. But there's going to be some constituent concerns and officials doing their navigation of politicking. Yeah,
and this incident probably raises more questions. Have you spoken with Urban Alchemy or city officials about this?
Well, that's interesting because Lena Miller, the head of Urban Alchemy, put out a statement after the shooting. But when we asked her about what the security work that they're doing, it was crickets. We sent multiple requests and never got a response. And the same actually for Mayor London Breed, who has also been silent on this incident.
All right, Josh Koehn, senior reporter with our media partner, the San Francisco Standard. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. Bye-bye.
We have links to the San Francisco Standard's other original reporting. That's all on our website, abc7news.com. And to watch more ABC7 segments featuring the San Francisco Standard's city-focused journalism, check out our ABC7 Bay Area streaming TV app. We'll be right back. All right, thanks everybody. Thank you so much. We have Josh still with us, so we can bring him back on just to wrap up our conversation. Josh, are you still there?
Hey, let's go. I'm here.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, we have like another minute and a half on Facebook Live. So I'd love to hear about what's your next story?
Oh, well, shoot, I can't give it to you all at once right now. We got to publish it. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Of course, we're following up. We're hearing from supervisors who are likely going to be commenting on this. We're looking more into the contracts of Urban Alchemy, and we're also looking at some allegations that on top of this worker who was shot, there might be other incidents in which employees are being put in very dangerous situations. So there's definitely a lot more to come.
Again, they're put in those security situations without necessarily the same type of security training requirement. So that does need to be looked into, especially if they're going to continue to be in dangerous situations. How about these contracts? When they're approved, I mean, what kind of scrutiny do they get?
It's a good question. Urban Alchemy has really grown incredibly fast. And when it comes to really knowing all of the financials and how they work, actually, there's not a whole lot of records around of like how Urban Alchemy is paying its top executives and how it's putting that money to good use. We do know in at least one email, the head of Urban Alchemy said, we won't take a contract unless we can also do security. So it's like they're basically kind of saying, we want all of it or none of it.
Right.
And yeah, that's a dangerous situation to have them doing security all the time.
All right, Josh Koehn, great work. Thank you for keeping us posted. We look forward to having you on again in the near future. Take care.
Right on. Bye, Kristen.
Thank you so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. Today, you heard from Congressman Eric Swalwell, who previewed President Biden's State of the Union, which will be happening at 6 p.m. our time, and we'll carry it live here on ABC 7. And of course, we'll be here every weekday at 3 on air and on live stream answering your questions. World News Tonight is coming up next, and we'll see you back here at 4.